Forget New Year, New You. This season is about slowing down, locking the doors, and cozying up at home with the one you really want to do nothing with. Your dog. After the holiday chaos, those quiet nights with a blanket, a podcast, and your pup feel like the reset you actually need. Ollie helps make those moments easier with fresh protein-packed meals made from real human-grade ingredients, so your dog can enjoy some quality comfort food too. Choose from 5 recipes and get a personalized plan for your dog's needs. Meals arrive perfectly proportioned with a scoop and storage container, so serving is fast and mess-free. And with Ollie's in-app on-demand health screenings, supporting your dog is easy, ensuring more cuddles for many years to come. Visit ollie.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for 60% off your first box.
In December 2012, Sergeant Richard Sperando with the Arlington Heights Police Department, a suburb about 25 miles northwest of Chicago, Illinois, was looking through the file of a case that had gone cold, an unsolved case that had occurred in April of 1991. 59-year-old Loretta Tabak Bodke had been found dead in her Arlington Heights home, having been shot 4 times. Although there had been a few leads, no arrests had ever been made in the case, and so Sergeant Sperando, along with some other officers and detectives, were taking another look at it to see if there was anything that had been missed. Inside the file was something that might have looked a little out of place. There was mention of a police report from the nearby Barrington Hills Police Department. It detailed a fatal car accident that had occurred there at about 11:30 p.m. on September 14th, 1973, almost 20 years prior to Loretta's murder. According to the report, a man named Donnie Rudd, who was 31 at the time, had told police that he and his wife of just a month, 19-year-old Noreen Kumata, had been driving home from her mom's house when another driver ran them off the road. He said Noreen was thrown from the car and had hit her head on a rock. She was transported to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead. Days later, she was buried in her wedding dress. What was interesting about this car accident was that Donnie Rudd also had a connection to Loretta. He had been her attorney, and she had been about to file a complaint against him when she was murdered. He was the main suspect in the case. The Arlington Heights officers decided to try to find out more about Noreen's death. They discovered that the Kane County coroner had conducted a coroner's inquest and that Donnie had testified about the circumstances of the accident. But they couldn't find any x-rays or lab reports that had been taken at the hospital. There were also no photographs of the accident scene and no witness statements, aside from Donnie's. The emergency room doctor had noted the cause of death as fracture of the cervical spine due to trauma, but an autopsy had never been performed, so there was no conclusive cause of death. Sergeant Sperando decided to interview the Barrington Hills police officer who had first responded to the scene of the accident. By this time, Christopher Bish was no longer working in Barrington Hills. He was now a captain at the Morgan County, Georgia Sheriff's Department, but he still had a pretty clear memory of the accident in question, and in fact, told Sergeant Sperando that he had never forgotten about the case and that he had always suspected foul play. Captain Bish explained that he had been a rookie police officer with only 6 months' experience when he first responded to the crash scene. He also pointed out that Barrington Hills had a small police department with limited resources for an in-depth investigation. Captain Bish recalled arriving to the scene and attempting to perform CPR on Noreen. She had a serious injury to the back of her head, and he remembered Donnie pointing out a rock and saying that there was blood and hair on it. Donnie told him that Noreen must have struck her head on the rock when she was thrown from the vehicle. He said they had been arguing prior to the accident. Later, at the hospital, Captain Bish spoke to Donnie again, and afterwards, he remembered telling his sergeant at the time, "Something isn't right. This guy pushed her from the car." Captain Bish couldn't recall talking to any witnesses at the scene, but did remember that there was little to no damage to the car itself. He said he did take photographs of the scene, but couldn't be sure where they are now. As the Arlington Heights officers continued looking into the mysterious car crash, they discovered that Donnie had taken out a $100,000 life insurance policy on Noreen prior to her death, and that after her death, he had been paid that money. He had also received all of Noreen's employment benefits in excess of $30,000. And if that wasn't all, there was also something suspicious about Donnie's love life. Sergeant Sperando learned that Donnie's marriage to Noreen, which was his second, seemed to be a bit impulsive. Right up until they got married, Donnie had been living with another woman, Diane Hart, and her 4 children. And shortly after Noreen's death, Donnie moved right back in with Diane and married her just 8 months later, in May 1974. Sergeant Sperando and his fellow officers were suspicious enough that they decided to meet with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office to see about having Noreen's body possibly exhumed. But little did they know just what that exhumation would expose. Today we take a look at a case that has more twists and turns than any other case I've covered. And we get inside the life of a man who was so diabolical, so manipulative, that he literally got away with murder, perhaps multiple times, for many years. Today's case involves a man who many would call a sociopath, a woman who would stop at nothing to protect him, and a delayed justice system, if there's really any justice in this case at all. This is Jillian, and you are listening to Court Junkie, episode 71. Cindy Hart recalls a pretty happy and normal childhood in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. She was the second oldest of 4 children, and her parents were happily married, from what she knew of anyway. Her dad worked a full-time job, and her mom was very involved in their school, first as a room mom and then as president of the school board. Their Baptist religion also played a big part in their lives growing up.
So the Baptist religion is a very strict religion. I mean, we didn't wear 2-piece bathing suits, and when we got a skirt, we were measured whether it was 6 inches above our knees. And that kind of tells you how, it was such a surprise when my mom had an affair with Donnie. It was so much not something that we expected.
Cindy's mom, Diane, had gotten married when she was just 18 years old and had her first child at the age of 19. She didn't get the chance to go to college, and Cindy said that as she got older, she decided she wanted more out of life. One of the first things she decided to do was to run for the school board, where she first met Donnie Rudd, a local attorney who was also on the school board. It was the early 1970s.
I don't know exactly when they started having their affair, but it was something my mom, I think, her relationship with Donnie, was so different than my dad. There was just so much romanticism in it that she probably lacked a little bit of self-confidence over the years. And I think all the attention he paid and the love notes and everything, that she finally decided she couldn't stay married to my dad anymore. So she came home and she told my dad that she was going to leave, that she was having an affair.
The affair broke up their family, and not only their family, but Donnie's family too. Donnie had been married to a woman named Luann, and together they too had 4 children. In fact, the 2 families had grown close over the years. Cindy recalled how she would even babysit Donnie and Luann's kids. Cindy's dad was devastated, but eventually he and Luann found comfort in each other. They started dating and ended up getting married. Meanwhile, Diane, Donnie, and Diane's 4 children moved in together. But their romance, which had started out as somewhat of a fairy tale in Diane's eyes, didn't go quite so well. For one thing, Donnie had no interest in being a dad to Diane's kids, or really to his own kids that he had had with Luann.
It's like he was more into a successful career and being with my mom. And we were just there. And my mom was a good mom. She loved us. But it was a lot more about Donnie at that time in our lives.
Donnie also started to be absent a lot and wasn't coming home all the time. Diane even caught him cheating on her multiple times, but she never left. As Cindy puts it, Diane was obsessed with him.
I mean, it was very upset because she had given up her life for Donnie. She had given up everything she knew. My mom was the type who, she was so in love with Donnie, she would have given up her children. She would have given up everything. And we were close to her. But she was obsessed with him.
Diane wouldn't break up with him, But one day, in 1973, Donnie came home and delivered some shocking news. He was going to marry somebody else, a 19-year-old woman named Noreen, whom Cindy had never heard of before. But instead of kicking him out, Diane let him stay there that same night, something that Cindy and her older sister Lori could not believe.
He told my mom, and then my mom kind of blurted it out to us that Donnie's not staying here anymore, that he's gonna leave. He's gonna marry Noreen. And the part that killed us is like, why would she let him stay overnight? Like, she still had this idea and obsession with him that she could change his mind. It was the way that he manipulated her.
Donnie did end up leaving the next day and did end up marrying Noreen that same day. Cindy recalled that Donnie continued calling Diane even while he and Noreen were on their honeymoon. Donnie and Noreen both worked at the Quaker Oats Company in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Shortly after they began dating, Noreen told her family that they were getting married. According to police reports, her family was also surprised. Donnie and Noreen spent their honeymoon in Acapulco, Mexico, and when they came home, Noreen's sister would later tell police that Noreen was, quote, deathly ill, which they thought was due to food poisoning while on vacation. Noreen died in the car accident less than 1 month later. So how did you first hear about Noreen's death?
My mom was crying, and I came home, and it just seemed so bizarre when we heard the story. And I mean, the neighbors, none of them, I mean, they knew Donnie was at our house. I mean, most of the neighbors didn't talk to us because divorce wasn't common in the 70s. So we lost a lot of friends. I got to the point where I went and lived with my dad for a year. I didn't even tell my new friends that my parents were divorced. So I kind of spent a lot of my life trying to avoid the situation. But I would say that it was so confusing. Like, at first when they said Donnie's wife died, people thought they were talking about my mom. It was just a mass confusion. And it seemed like my mom was upset, but I don't know if my mom was more upset because Donnie had actually married and lived with Noreen than her getting killed. My mom went and saw Donnie that night, and we had a handwritten note that my mom had written to Donnie that night, saying, I think you need help and things like that. But it was clear then that she was going to take him back.
And Diane did take him back. In fact, he moved right back in with Diane and her children, almost as if his marriage to Noreen had never happened. Cindy said that after the accident, her older sister Lori went with Diane to the tow yard and saw the car that Donnie had been driving during the accident. Lori told her that there was hardly any damage to the car and that she saw blood in the front passenger seat. Cindy never asked Donnie about the accident, but Lori did.
Like I said, I'm not a very confrontational person. At one time, Lori confronted him and said, what happened? And he said that, she fell out of the car and she hit a rock. And she always said there was no emotion in it, but she had a conversation with him because she said she felt like if you had somebody and you lost a spouse, even if it was someone you were with for a short period of time, that there should have been more sadness about it, that there should have been more talking about it. And the fact that he was back with my mom so quickly, and he was with my mom before, it didn't seem right. But there was no time in between there. There was no time element in between there.
Diane and Donnie ended up getting married the following year. But by this time, Cindy said Diane seemed to be trying harder to keep Donnie. It was almost as though she was afraid he would go and find somebody else. Diane decided to sell their childhood house and everything in it in order to start completely fresh with Donnie. They then purchased 2 townhomes right next door to each other in Barrington Square. The kids lived on one side, and Donnie and Diane lived on the other. Cindy, who was only in high school around this time, said the kids actually didn't see Diane and Donnie very much. Diane went back and got her college degree and became an attorney, while Donnie opened up his own law practice, specializing in condo laws in Chicago. But even though they didn't see him too often, Cindy said Donnie would sneak into the townhouse where the kids lived and harass them, and what she thinks was a form of manipulation.
But when we lived with Donnie, this is how Donnie used to manipulate us. we lived in the house next door and they lived in their house and there was a lock between the door. But Donnie would come over and he would like take all the handles off the stove, or he would like glue our window shut so we couldn't open the windows, or he'd put salt in the cereal, or he would glue our pockets on our clothes. You know, he would do it when nobody was around so you couldn't catch him, but he would do all of this stuff. He eventually, my sister lived in the basement with Jack. At one point, he put a hole in, it was vandalism. My mom collected on insurance, put a hole in the hot water heater and put electricity into it. So if someone had gone down in the basement, they would have been electrocuted. He would disconnect the garage door opener. I mean, he would do all of this stuff constantly to us. And it was like, we called ourselves Team Hart. We're like, we're not going to let him win. And I'm sure we weren't the angels, but this is a grown man that's a lawyer, flattening our tires before he goes to work to make sure that we can't do anything that we want to.
Meanwhile, Donnie's law practice eventually took off. He was pretty successful and had even earned the playful nickname of Mr. Condo around town. But pretty soon, his clients began complaining about his practice. In April 1991, Loretta Tabak-Bodke, an interior designer, was one of those clients. She reportedly threatened to file a legal complaint against him after he refused to pay her settlement money he claimed to have won for her in her case. According to reports, Loretta repeatedly asked for her money, and the day before she died, Donnie gave her a check that he had written, a check that would bounce if cashed. The next day, she was shot to death in her own home. After Loretta's death, that check Donnie had given her was found ripped up in a garbage can in Diane and Donnie's house, and multiple neighbors reported seeing a car with Mr. Condo vanity plates in Loretta's driveway around the time of the murder. I asked Cindy if her family was suspicious at the time that Donnie had murdered Loretta. Although she couldn't be sure that her mom was, the suspicion was definitely there for Cindy and her siblings. But she said they didn't want to believe that he could do something as horrific as that.
To think that he actually shot her was hard to believe that he could have done it. And again, I think until the police reopened the case and I really decided I wanted to know the truth, I think I wanted to believe that he couldn't have possibly done something so violent.
Although Donnie was the main suspect in Loretta's murder, prosecutors declined to file charges. Diane testified in front of the grand jury on Donnie's behalf. She came armed with phone records and a timeline and claimed that Donnie couldn't have murdered Loretta. Cindy said Diane was intent on protecting Donnie at all costs. But although he escaped arrest for Loretta's murder, Donnie's professional downfall continued. In 1994, he was disbarred, and Diane decided that they should get out of Illinois, and so they moved to Texas. Meanwhile, Cindy's sister Lori took over Donnie's practice, and that's when she learned firsthand about his shady business practices.
What he had been doing over the years was he would basically tell people he had filed lawsuits when he hadn't. He'd tell people he won cases when he didn't. He would have no problem signing a judge's signature to a court document. Things were a lot more manual 30 years ago. So he had been reported to the ARDC, which is the Attorney's Regulation Disciplinary Committee, on numerous occasions. He was on probation. And after Loretta's death, they still filed a case because the reason Loretta was murdered, the motive for it was that he had told her he had won a case and she was going to get a substantial amount of money and then it was going to be wire transferred to her. And every day he'd say it was going to be wire transferred, but he hadn't won the case. So there was never going to be any money. So she kept threatening to report him to the Airline Regulatory Committee to say, and then if he got reported again, he was going to lose his license because he was already on probation for doing the same thing years before. He would sue the wrong people. He'd never sue them at all. He'd tell them they won when he never even filed the lawsuit. He would manipulate the law. And the thing that a normal person would say, okay, well, if you don't get, if the person doesn't get their $100,000, they're going to know I lied. But in his concept, either he expected my mom to figure it out, and on numerous occasions, if it was a low amount of money, my mom would just pay it just to keep him out of trouble. But then they started to get bigger. His promises got bigger, and she couldn't do it anymore.
Donnie and Diane stayed married until she passed away in 1996 after battling breast cancer. But not long before her death, Donnie left her for another woman, and so the kids ended up moving her back to Illinois. Donnie only came to see her once.
He came one day to make her sign over some paperwork, and Lori just looked at him and said, "You get out of here right now." My mom spent all day getting herself fixed up and looking beautiful, thinking that he was going to come and be there in her last breath. And he literally came for less than 2 hours. It's the saddest love story that you could ever imagine.
After Diane passed away, Donnie sent Cindy and her siblings a letter saying that if they didn't give him Diane's life insurance money, he would take away Cindy's CPA and have Lori disbarred. They ignored him. 6 months later, Donnie remarried again. Although not much is known about that marriage, it was reportedly annulled after his new wife discovered that he had been lying about his professional accomplishments. But in 2000, Donnie married yet again, his fifth wife, a woman named Emma. They were together for about 10 years before divorcing in 2010. Professionally, after Donnie moved to Texas, he ironically started working for the government as a fraud investigator. Cindy told me that he told them that he was investigating President Clinton's Whitewater investigation. He then reportedly reinvented himself and told people he was a scientist who had a cure for AIDS and lupus. He likely didn't know it at the time, but investigators back in Illinois were working hard to prove that Donnie was also a murderer. In December 2012, the case into Noreen's death was reopened after Sergeant Richard Sperando had first started looking into Loretta's death. Cindy and Lori were called into the Arlington Heights Police Department, and just as they had before, they told them everything they knew about Donnie. They weren't about to protect him, as their mother had. Cindy recalled that afterwards, in the car with Lori said to her, "It seems like they're really going to do something this time." After Noreen's body was exhumed on February 6, 2013, she was transported to the DuPage County morgue where an autopsy was performed. Dr. Hillary McElligott told investigators that Noreen hadn't died from a broken neck at all, but from a head injury on the left side of her head. Someone had hit her with a blunt force object. In December 2013, investigators in Arlington Heights felt like they had enough evidence to charge someone in Noreen's death. On December 17th, armed with an arrest warrant, they traveled to where Donnie, now 73 years old, was living in Sugar Land, Texas. They approached him as he was exiting a local grocery store, and Sergeant Sperando told him they were investigating Loretta's murder, that he was a suspect, and that they wanted to ask him some questions. Donnie agreed to go with them to the Sugar Land Police Department. When they got there, they went into an interview room and they read Donnie his Miranda rights. He waived them and agreed to answer their questions. They started by asking him questions about his personal life, and he told them that he had been briefly married to a woman named Noreen, but he said, quote, "She got killed in an automobile accident." They pressed him for details, and he said he went down a ravine. When asked if she died inside the car or outside, he said, "She died in the car." When asked if there was any damage to the vehicle, he said yes, that there was damage to the front end and side. He told them that he, too, had suffered injuries from the crash, kidney damage and head damage. But other than that, Donnie claimed he couldn't remember much. When asked about the differing versions and what he was saying now versus what he said the night of the accident, he couldn't remember. Even when shown a photograph of Noreen, he said he couldn't identify her, even though she had been his wife at one point. Donnie was also questioned about Loretta's murder, but investigators didn't get what they were looking for there either. They ended up letting Donnie leave without executing their arrest warrant. Donnie left and agreed to come back the next morning. This interview wasn't very different. They showed him a photograph of Noreen's body after she had been exhumed, but he showed little reaction, only saying, "Interesting," while pushing the photo away. They asked him if he had remembered anything else about the car accident, and he said he hadn't thought about it after leaving the night before, but that he would reflect on the situation and try to email them at a later date with his best recollection of what happened. They again let him go, and 2 days later, the arrest warrant was recalled. In August 2014, Dr. Hillary McElligott, who had performed Noreen's autopsy, officially changed the cause and manner of Noreen's death to homicide from blunt force trauma. But it wasn't until December 17th, 2015, when Donnie Rudd would again come face-to-face with investigators from Arlington Heights. After hearing a knock on his apartment door in Sugar Land, Texas, Donnie, who was busy talking on his cell phone, opened the door and was surprised to see Commander Hayes and Sergeant Sperando standing there. They told him they needed to speak with him about their investigation and that he needed to go with them to the Sugar Land Police Department. This time, Donnie refused and told them that he had things to do. But this time, he didn't have a choice. Sergeant Sperando took Donnie's cell phone and told him that they had a warrant for his arrest. According to the police report, as they were handcuffing him, Donnie asked, "What for?" "Murder," Sergeant Sperando told him. And Donnie immediately blurted out, "Which one?" When Cindy heard about the arrest, she was in disbelief. Not at what Donnie was being accused of, but that he was finally being arrested for it.
I sat there and it was very disbelief. It was incredible after all this time that this would actually happen. So I said to Lori, should I call the family? And I think a part of us didn't believe that it had really happened. We didn't believe that he had finally been arrested after all this time. And so she's like, let's wait and see what happens. So, all day I was kind of Googling, looking to see when something would come across. And when I saw the first little news clip come across from Fox News or something on the TV, and I knew it was true, I called my dad. And it was just disbelief. It's very disbelief.
Donnie ended up posting a $400,000 bail and was released from jail while he awaited trial. And in June 2018, that trial finally happened. Donnie was now 75 years old. Cindy recalled that while he was out on bail, Donnie would show up to hearings with the ability to walk. But as soon as the trial started, he was in a wheelchair. The prosecutor fought to keep that wheelchair out of the eyesight of the jurors.
Donnie would show up in a wheelchair, and they didn't want him to have the sympathy, so that they asked the judge to put his wheelchair in the back room so that the jury couldn't have the sympathy vote that he expected he would get. I actually got an email from someone that saw him one of the weekends in between the trial, but stopped and talked to him. He was not in a wheelchair walking around in Chicago. And he said, yeah, I'm on trial for murdering my wife. And then he said something to him like, do you know that there's a difference between killing someone and murdering somebody?
While there were many people in the galley in support of Noreen and her family, including Cindy and Loretta's family members, there was no one who showed up in support of Donnie. In her opening statement, Assistant State's Attorney Maria McCarthy told the jury that Donnie led a double life. He was living with Diane and her children while courting Noreen and then marrying her. She said Donnie married Noreen for the money. He wanted to collect the insurance money if she were to happen to die accidentally. He married her because he wanted to kill her, she said. And 27 days after he married her, he did just that. Noreen was nothing more than a pawn, a means to an end. She said after Noreen died, he immediately went back to Diane and was even at Diane's house on the day of Noreen's funeral. In his defense, Donnie's attorney, Timothy Grace, said Noreen died in a tragic accident and that her cause of death was a fracture to her cervical spine, which is what was listed on the emergency room report. He said there's no evidence that she died of blunt force trauma and no evidence that Donnie even knew about Noreen's insurance policies. He also told the jury that Donnie wasn't leading a double life, that he had been cheating on Diane, but that was all it was. As for Donnie and Noreen's rapid relationship, he said they fell in love and that their marriage was an impulsive act. Captain Christopher Bish recalled for the jury what he remembered from the night of the accident. He said when he responded to the scene, he found Donnie in the front seat, holding Noreen. He and some other officers pulled her out of the car and did CPR, which he said was the first time he had ever done that. As he was giving CPR, he put his hand under her head and said it felt mushy. Donnie told him that a car had run them off the road and that Noreen had been thrown from their vehicle. He had then carried her back to the car. He said Noreen's head had hit a rock, and that there was a rock with Noreen's hair and blood on it. Captain Bish said he never found that rock. He also said he didn't see any grass or dirt on Noreen's clothing. On cross-examination, Captain Bish was asked why he didn't do anything about it, if he really thought the death was suspicious.
When Donnie's attorney was questioning him, and they were trying to say, well, this happened 40 years ago. If you thought this was suspicious, why did you never do anything? He said, I thought about Noreen's death every day. He was new on the job. He said, I went to the inquest. He always felt that there was something suspicious about it too. And he said, I thought about Noreen every single day for 43 years. That was just, to me, like, that was impactful.
The emergency room doctor who pronounced Noreen dead testified that he did indeed write that the probable cause of her death was a fractured cervical spine. As for why he never ordered any x-rays, he said they tried to treat the living and that she had no vital signs. But he said he did notice that she had a scalp wound. Dr. Hilary McElligott testified about her finding that Noreen's death was a homicide. She said the injuries on Noreen's body that she saw after the body had been exhumed were not consistent with being thrown from a car. Instead, she said Noreen died from multiple blows to the head with a blunt object.
Listening to the pathologist, and I think the most convincing part was when they talked about the autopsy on her head and how she had less trauma to the right side of her head versus the left side of her head. And as she was sitting in the passenger seat of the car and fell out, she had no broken bones, she had no scrapes or anything below her neck. How could she have gotten more lesions on the left side of her head unless she was hit with some kind of blunt force trauma? And then the right side would have hit the ground or hit the side of the car, depending on where it happened.
On cross-examination, Dr. McElligott agreed that she did not see any defensive injuries. But two other pathologists testified that they also agreed with Dr. McElligott that Noreen died from multiple blunt force blows to her head and that she likely was not thrown from the car. When it was their turn, Donnie's defense team got their own expert, Dr. Robert Hurwitz, who said he disagreed with them. He said that teenagers and young children are at a greater risk for the tendons connecting the head and the spine to separate, an internal decapitation. When that happens, the medulla is crushed, breathing is stopped, and death would be immediate. This was consistent, he said, with being ejected from an automobile. He said Noreen died instantly, and that although she did have a skull fracture, as the state's pathologists had noted, he said it wasn't a fatal wound. On cross-examination, Dr. Hurwitz's qualifications were questioned. He agreed that he's a diagnostic radiologist, not a pathologist, and that he had never performed an autopsy, nor determined the manner of death in a criminal case before. In their closing arguments, Assistant State's Attorney Maria McCarthy told the jury that Donnie had staged Noreen's death to look like an accident and that he had fooled a lot of people. She pointed out that he chose to take a specific route home, one comprised of more isolated roads than the more obvious and direct route home. He did that so there would be less chance of witnesses. In his closing arguments, Donnie's attorney, Timothy Grace, reminded the jury that even though Donnie cheated on his girlfriend, it doesn't mean he committed murder. Cindy didn't stay to hear the verdict. The trial had notably taken quite a toll on everyone who had been affected by Noreen's death. The jury deliberated for about 3 hours before finding Donnie guilty of Noreen's murder.
It brought so much of what Noreen could have been and how sad it was that her family believed for 40 years that, it was an accident. And, I didn't stay for the guilty verdict, and I went to lunch and the jury was deliberating, and my husband had come for closing arguments, and I was sitting upstairs, and I just looked and I said, I don't need to stay. This isn't about my family. It's about Noreen's, and I don't need to be here for the verdict. I know what it's going to be. So I came home and got a text that he was found guilty.
It seemed as though Donnie may not have been expecting the guilty verdict.
He acted like he was going to get away with it like he always did, especially in a lot of the pre-trials. You'd see him laughing, talking to his attorney, not a care in the world. It was scary. I mean, there were times you would walk in and you would have no idea that it was a murder trial. He smiled. He was talking to his attorney. It was not real. And I think over the years, he had always somehow managed to escape all of it.
Outside the courtroom, prosecutor Maria McCarthy told a reporter from the Chicago Tribune that, quote, "I hope that every killer who's out there and hasn't been caught hears about this case and thinks that there will be a knock on the door." At his sentencing, Donnie took the stand for 30 minutes and maintained his innocence, saying that Noreen wasn't murdered at all, that she died when their car was run off the road. He said there was no way he could have hit her over the head because of a prior injury to his arm. He also claimed that he had no idea how much money he was going to receive after Noreen's death. Jurors in the case never heard about how Donnie was a suspect in Loretta Tabak Bodke's murder, but prosecutors were allowed to talk about it at his sentencing. They called multiple detectives to the stand to testify about the details of the murder, and how even though he had never been charged, Donnie was still the main suspect. Judge Mark Martin sentenced him to 75 to 150 years in prison for Noreen's murder. But Cindy says it's hard to feel like justice has been served. Donnie is 75 years old, was recently diagnosed with colon cancer, and is just now being sent to prison after being free for over 45 years.
Here's Noreen's family, who sat through something that was so unbelievably sad. And the fact that for 40 years they thought it was an accident, how horrible for what they went through. And I'm not saying that I'm at all think that he shouldn't have gone to trial, but where is justice in putting a 75-year-old man who's run around for 40 years and done the things that he's done in jail? I mean, is that really what you would call justice? My family feels that there's validation because we always said, our question was always, do you think he did it? Do you think he did it? We never really had the answers. And the fact that a jury about the years found him so quickly accountable, at least that closes one door, and gives us validation that we didn't, that it is true, that our questions weren't, unfounded.
Cindy and her sister Lori wrote a book about their experiences with Donnie called Living with the Devil. It took them 3 years to write it. It was too emotional at times, Cindy said. One of Donnie's daughters from his first marriage to Luann, Teresa, worked on the cover art.
I'm glad we told our story. I hope people learn from it. I think that, I always tell people that, you couldn't make up what happened. I mean, you just couldn't make it up if you wanted to.
But Cindy is still left with some haunting questions. Like if Donnie had been convicted of Noreen's death after it happened all those years ago, would Loretta still be alive? And would her mom still be alive?
After we wrote the book, 2 of my mom's closest friends wrote me letters saying that they believed Donnie had killed my mom, and that she had given him hormone therapy stuff to make her cancer grow. And that one of them told us that my mom had told her that if anything ever happened to her, that they should check Donnie. So clearly there was something that was known. Now, I didn't know that when I wrote the book, but it was 2 of the people that were closest. And it gives me goosebumps to think. And also, how could we not have known how bad things were?
Cindy also struggles with how much her mom knew about all the things that Donnie had done. But after the trial, after hearing all of the evidence against him, Cindy says she has a hard time believing that her mom didn't know about what happened to Noreen.
I don't know. I don't know that I'll ever know the truth. But I find it difficult, very difficult to believe that my mom didn't know at this point, after sitting through the trial. I can honestly say until I sat through the trial, I didn't feel that way. But after sitting through the trial and listening to the evidence, I find it hard to believe that my mom being in love with someone that you would know so little about.
I asked if she thought her mom was afraid of Donnie.
I definitely think my mom was afraid of him at times, but I think she was obsessed and in love with him. That was something that was almost like, it was hard to understand how you could love someone. I mean, I guess you see it in a lot of battered women that continually go back to their husband. No matter how many times he did it, she was still so in love with him. And even when he did something horrible and got caught, he came back with such a diligence of, writing her love notes. I mean, I have hundreds of love notes that she left. He would leave on the car. He would leave at every place for her. So somehow he always made it to her heart, and she eventually became his protector. And that's probably why they stayed together for so long, is because he needed her to get him out of his trouble.
Despite everything, there are some things that Cindy would love people to know about her mom.
I'd like people to know that my mom was such a kind and helping person. I mean, she helped her house cleaner's son get to the United States and get to the military. She always helped the weak. She prayed for people. And there was so much in her life that was so good, and she was so good. It's just when it came to Donnie, there was something that was different about her. She called her kids every day. I mean, every day I talked to her. We had a close relationship. But there was something about Donnie that had this magnetic force over her that now when you look back, it's harder for me to put her on such a pedestal. But all of us loved my mom dearly, and she would be the first person to call, and she would always be there, and she would have the best advice in the world, and she would have done anything for us, unless it had to do with Donnie.
So what kind of advice does Cindy have for anyone who may have someone like Donnie in their life?
I mean, I'd love to tell you to run as far as you could away, but I know that that's not easy. I think that, you have to go into it and realize, I mean, like a lot of people say to me, like, have you talked to Donnie since the trial or since the guilty? And a part of me would like to go in and say, did you have anything to do with my mom's death? Can you tell the truth? But he's not capable of telling the truth. So having a conversation with him is not going to make a difference. And I can honestly say that you can't change them. There's no medication. There's nothing you can do for people like that. And, don't let them take you down with them. If you're going to stay in that relationship, keep your independence and be who you are and see it for what it is.
Cindy and Lori's book details even more of Donnie's unbelievable behavior, like how when Diane was diagnosed with cancer, Donnie shaved his head and told people that he had cancer too, or how he continued to harass them even while their mother was dying.
He would, like when I would go to take care of my mom when she had cancer, I'd wake up every morning and my rent-a-car would have flat tires. So I would stop at Target on my way so I could get air so that I could combat it without having to call Mr. Rescue. At one point, and we write about it in the book, he would put his cigarettes out on the couch and cause all these problems with my mom. And he was telling my mom he was going to kill himself, so he would put a bag over his head, and my mom would call the police, and the police would come, and then he'd tell them that she was crazy. And he could manipulate the police to believe that my mom was suffering from all the cancer medication she was taking. And so then, I tried to go to the police station and say, my mom is not crazy, he's crazy. But, we lived in Dallas. So flying back and forth to take care of her when all this craziness was going on was killing us.
And if all that isn't enough, Donnie may actually be guilty of more than just the murders of Noreen and Loretta. Cindy told me, and I also found a corresponding police report, that Donnie has a twin brother who he's estranged from, because Donnie's brother believes that Donnie may have killed their father. Donnie picked up their father one day and brought him to his house to live with him. He changed his dad's will and left everything to himself. And when their dad passed away, he had him buried before even calling his brother to tell him that their father was dead. And after Cindy and Lori wrote their book, Cindy received an interesting email.
I got an email from one of the kids from Donnie's later wife who told me that she also knew that he had taken life insurance policies out on her mom without telling her.
We may never know what that means, but if you believe Donnie was capable of killing Noreen, as the jury did, and capable of killing Loretta, then he was certainly capable of at least thinking about killing his later wife, too.
My heart breaks for the people that are never going to get closure to what Donnie did to them. I have a lot of sympathy for what everybody went through with him. I feel bad that I'm a part of it.
Donnie is still considered a suspect in Loretta Tabak-Botke's murder, although as of this recording, he has never been charged in the case. He is expected to appeal his conviction for Noreen's murder. And that's all for today's episode. As always, I'd love to hear what you think about this case. What are your thoughts on Donnie being charged for Noreen's murder 45 years later? Do you think he may have killed others too, like Diane and his father? And have you ever known someone like Donnie in your lifetime? Let me know by tweeting me at CourtJunkiePod, emailing me at podcast@courtjunkie.com, or messaging me on Instagram at CourtJunkie. I recently did a Q&A on my Instagram stories, and I'm trying to be more active on there, so definitely give me a follow there. I'd like to thank Cindy for sharing her story with all of us. If you're interested in hearing more about what life was like with Donnie, check out Cindy and Lori's book, which is extremely fascinating. It's called Living with the Devil, and you can find it on Amazon or just go to livingwiththedevil.com. And lastly, if you'd like to hear these episodes early and ad-free, please consider donating to this podcast. For as little as $1 a month, you can get access to early ad-free episodes. Just go to courtjunkie.com/support. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.